Welcome to the Loved Called Gifted podcast. This is your place to come for musings about spirituality, identity and purpose. I'm your host, Catherine Cowell. So I'm really chuffed to be joined by Heidi Steele for the second time on the podcast. For those people who didn't hear you last time, Heidi from Live, Play, Learn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. It's lovely to be back. My name's Heidi Steele. Amongst other things, I am unschooling parent to 4 always unschooled children. And we did talk a little bit on the previous one about what unschooling is, but it's a kind of style of home educating. So my children have never been to school. And very briefly, one of the reasons that we chose to unschool and home educate our children was because of my experience and background as a former teacher. So I've always been very interested in education and how children learn. And that is how we ended up where we are. My children are now aged 18, 16, 13 and 10. Yeah, so we've been doing this a long time now.
Yes, and am I right in saying that there are elements of neurodiversity within your family?
Yes, you would be very right in saying that. I became apparent, or I don't know when it became really apparent, because of the lifestyle that we led. My children weren't put into the school situation, which quite often pressurises children, and particularly neurodivergent children, to behave in ways that isn't in line with how they feel comfortable and how they want to express themselves. And so those things, those idiosyncrasies can become very obvious in that environment. And so I think it took us a little bit longer to realise that that was coming into play. For example, my children weren't required at the age of 4 to sit still with their hands on their lap and face the front and make eye contact and look like they were listening and learning. They were still busy playing on the beach and climbing trees. And so the environment that they were in really suited them. And so it took a long while for us to realise that there was neurodivergence in play. And then, so 2 of my children have got official diagnosis, 2 of my children haven't, but I'm absolutely certain they could if that becomes something they want to pursue or something that is needed for any reason. So yeah, we've got quite the collection of neurodivergences between us. Definitely autistic, ADHD, PDA, we've got sensory issues, all preferences going on, language development, and comorbid health conditions as well. So we've got quite the complex array of things going on within our family.
So it really strikes me that it's been very fortunate for your children and for you, actually, that you made this decision to go with unschooling. And that has really, I remember from our previous conversation, that's really enabled you to create an environment and create a learning environment that has been very much naturally shaped around who they are, rather than who other people think they ought to be. So quite a lot of the battles that some people would have had with all of the stresses of trying to support a child who doesn't fit into the education system to fit into the education system, a lot of that you've not needed to do, which is lovely.
It is absolutely lovely. And I work with so many families, particularly post-pandemic, where it became apparent that actually their children were happier at home. And I work with a lot of families that's their story. Their story is that school really had a very negative impact on their children in one way or another. Anything from just losing a spark in their eyes to what we now call emotional-based school refusal, but absolutely anxiety really high and causing real distress for the children and therefore for the family as well. And then navigating the lack of support or the ill-informed support within a lot of school settings, which is sad. So I am ever so aware that we made the decision before we knew. That could have been my story very easily, and I am very fortunate. But I'm very aware that it happens to a lot of families, and a lot of families don't choose to home educate either. It's kind of the end of the line, and they feel like they've kind of been forced into it because of lack of options. My hope for everybody that finds themselves in that position is that they will find an enormous amount of support from the home educating community, because there is enormous amounts of support out there, and that in time it will be something that they will choose because they will see how amazing it is. That's my hope.
Yes, yeah. I only did a little short amount of home education, but I would say that actually the home ed community, even for the sort of 10 minutes that I was doing it with my oldest son, was beautiful. Really, 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 really lovely. You know, we met some fantastic people. So it's a nice world to end up in, even if you haven't particularly chosen it.
Yeah, definitely.
So the thing that made me think it would be really good to chat again, Heidi, is that you used a phrase when we spoke last time that really struck me. You talked about unschooling ourselves, which struck me as really interesting. And I thought that that might be something which would be helpful both to people who are thinking about the unschooling journey, but I also wondered what applicability that might have to people generally in their lives.
Yes.
So tell me, how would you define this idea of unschooling ourselves?
I would define it as us, as the adults, being really open to questioning things that we've always held to be true. So when we look at it in terms of linking it to unschooling, we that's kind of our starting point in terms of looking at education and things that we have been told are true about how children learn and what children need to learn and how they need to go about it and when they need to go about it. So even there, that's the starting point with schooling. But in terms of opening that up, once we start on that journey of just curiosity and saying, well, hang on a minute, what else might not be 100% true that I have held to be true without even thinking about it? There's so much of what we believe to be true isn't necessarily stuff that we've been explicitly taught. It's just our life experience. And so we just replicate what we're familiar with and what we know and what society at large, so in education, that's school, does. And we just kind of fall into a pattern of that's how we do things. So it's really opening up ourselves, like following this curiosity and questioning. Yeah, it can be about anything, which is why I was excited when you say, oh, how can that be applicable? Because you can kind of start anywhere, like wherever you're at and whatever it is that you're doing, that can be your starting point. But for so many people I work with, it's school and the education system.
So if you go back to the beginning of your unschooling journey as a parent, I know that you started off in education. So what were the things that you needed to do in terms of unschooling yourself that enabled you to then journey with your children? Or I'm guessing that probably the two kind of came together.
Yeah, because, one of the things that happens when you're unschooling is your children very much and very quickly get a grip of what's going on, because it's kind of really natural to them. Children don't want to sit down for 6 hours a day at a desk when you're 4 and 5 years old. Arguably, there is many an adult that doesn't or don't want to do that, and equally there are some that do. But actually, developmentally, that's not what children are designed to do, and so they very quickly can move into sitting on the carpet and playing with trains or climbing trees or going to play at the park. And it's quite natural for them. But in that is where the challenge comes for the adult. So the children are very rapidly understanding that they're happy doing those things and not doing workbooks and curriculums. And so very quickly the adults are challenged by what their children are doing. And that is really the starting point. For me, I knew that I had a very strong sense, based on my teaching experience, that my children were going to continue to learn through play, and that we weren't going to deliberately introduce workbooks or expectations about reading and how much they should be reading a day, and or writing or maths. But the challenge for me came when that continued kind of beyond the age of 7, because I kind of had this idea that at some point the things that they wanted to do would look like school. So the challenge for me came when it didn't. And it also came when they did express an interest in things, but they didn't want me to turn it into a project. So I was all up for, my son in particular was interested in the film Cars, which probably is a long time ago now, but people might remember Lightning McQueen. He was very interested in that, and we bought a few toys, and we got some big boxes and made the vehicles, and they played in them. But for the most part, it didn't look like I thought it was going to look like. He didn't want to sit and colour pictures of cars. He didn't want to make up stories. He didn't want to read the books that we'd got about cars. And there was always this sense that he'd never really finished anything that we started. And that was a real challenge for me. I remember that being a challenge. Like, if he was in school, he'd have to finish this project. Is he ever going to finish anything in his life ever? I can remember getting really stressed about it. And then my other son, he taught me a really good lesson. He can't sit still. So you won't be surprised to know he has an ADHD diagnosis. He can't sit still. And we used to go to some kind of science orientated workshops, and they were in somebody's garden. So it was outside, it was the summer, it was lovely, it was spacious. The guy who was leading it was amazing, very engaging, didn't mind the children kind of calling out and asking questions all the time. And he really responded very well to home educated children. And my son was at the end of the garden up a tree. And I was like, what are we doing here? Because he's not paying any attention whatsoever. Like, what are we doing here? I mean, I had 4 children, so I was obviously there not just for the one up a tree. So we kept going back. And then one week he came home and he was telling his dad all about what everybody else had been doing in this science orientated activity session. And that was a real lesson to me, because I thought, it looks so far from you are concentrating or paying any attention to this. I mean, it wasn't like he was even in the same space as everybody else. He was in the garden, but he was very separated from everybody else. And he'd got it all. He could explain all of it. And he was really enthusiastic about it. And I thought, yeah, that was a real lesson for me, in terms of how he was able to access that, because he was allowed to be up a tree and upside down. If he had been sat with the others and made to look like he was concentrating, actually, he wouldn't have been able to take that information in, because he would have been concentrating so hard on being sitting still and, putting all his energy and effort into making it look like he was paying attention, that actually he wouldn't have been able to engage in that at all. I think those are kind of examples of where it started for me. They're my starting points.
Yes. So despite the fact that you were going into this very creative, very child-led way of living life and doing parenting and doing education, and despite the fact that you were going into it with great determination to follow your children's lead and to allow them to be themselves, it's really interesting that you were still sort of carrying these sort of ideas and concepts with you from society and from the way we're expected to do things.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned parenting as well, because that very, very quickly changed. From when my second was born, he was very, very different as a child to my first. And we were already kind of set on a path of considering how we were parenting and what was actually going to, I was going to say what was going to work, but it wasn't what was going to work for us. It was what actually felt right and felt like good choices for us. And they were very different to some of the ideas that other parents have and how other parents parent.
So part of the unschooling of yourself is going to be in order that you can create this environment for your children without it being polluted by the expectations of society that you're kind of subconsciously carrying with you. I think one of the things that really interests me about this idea of unschooling ourselves is that the way that we manage ourselves is also really influenced by our kind of societal expectations that we are kind of carrying with us. So I am imagining, and tell me if I'm wrong, that part of the reason you wanted your kids to do a project that they finished is that that would have given you a certain amount of kind of internal kudos. And you could even show the grandparents who are kind of saying, I don't know what you're up to. Can they read yet? Do they know what fractions are? That you could say, look, we've done this project. Or, look, he started his own small business and he knows because. And if somebody's not finishing a project, then you haven't got that to sort of take with you. So I'm guessing that part of the unschooling yourself was in order to create an environment for the kids. You're nodding, so I'm guessing I'm not too far off.
Yeah, you're not too far off the point at all, no. It's because unschooling can go either way because it's so much responsive to your child. There are unschooling families whose children learn to read at the age of 3, whereas my eldest 3 children didn't learn to read till they were 12, and then my youngest child learned when she was 8. So you can imagine, like, the first 12 years, my eldest hadn't learned to read. And we had that question from my grandparents almost every time that we saw them. But that was one of the questions. Oh, how's the reading going? And I was like, well, we're doing other things instead because that's not something that's...
It hasn't come up yet.
Yes, it hasn't happened yet.
What fascinates me, I mean, for different reasons, both of my two, they're now 17 and 19, but both of them really struggled in the school system. And for many years, I'd not really got good evidence that either of them were literate. But now, I see them on their phones, I see them reading stuff. One of my boys has used AI to kind of create romantic messages, but he can read them. I was like, this is really, really interesting. And my oldest has done theory tests for driving lorries and coaches. And these involve some really quite technical language, and he can read it. And I don't quite understand how we got to that, but we did. So absolute kudos to you for kind of holding your nerve.
Yeah, there's a lot of holding your nerve in unschooling. And I mean, I talked about home ed community at the beginning, and having like unschooling community is really important. I think it's invaluable because you're going to be in a space with people that have got children that are older. So you've got people that have got experience that they can share, but also you're surrounded by people who kind of understand what it is that you're doing and how it is that you're doing it. So it's a really lovely place to bring those unschooling ourselves questions when we're the ones that are being challenged by our child not being able to read, or not finishing a project, or being up a tree, or not wanting to leave the house, or not knowing their fractions. We've never explicitly taught fractions, but we have we're a family of 6. We have talked about how to fairly cut up a cake and what that looks like. And if someone has 2 slices, well, then they've got 2 6, and that's the same as a third. So we've kind of had those conversations. And money, lots of fractions around money, how we're going to share that equally. So it does come up, but you don't have like a set lesson on a set day. And, the examples you gave there about your sons and what they're doing now, and in terms of their literacy, and, the examples you've gave are both driven by things they want to do, which is really key in unschooling, that our children are driven by the things that they want to do. And when we engage in something that we want to do, the learning is really meaningful. It has meaning to us, and it's much easier to learn. So that technical language that your son is using, to him, that's absolutely what he's driven by, and therefore it's like when young children know all the names of the dinosaurs when they're 4. They can't spell what or play or but they can have a good stab at diplodocus. It's because it has meaning for them. They're really interested in it.
So the other side of the unschooling ourselves that really interests me is thinking about how that has changed your relationship with yourself and the way that you are in the world and the way that you are with yourself.
Yeah, a massive change. So this is more related, I think, to the parenting side, like the way that we relate with our children and the way that we treat our children and parent our children. We look at their behaviours, and we look at their behaviours as communication. We don't look at their behaviours as something that we have to praise and reward the good stuff and then correct and maybe punish the bad stuff. But actually to look at their behaviours as communication and look at it like it's telling us something, that they're distressed in this situation, or they found something today really hard, or they're overwhelmed, and actually to respond to that with kindness and compassion, and to help them co-regulate. So we do a lot of co-regulating, and to help them as they get older be more reflective about maybe the situation that they were in and what could we do next time that would help them navigate the same situation. So like all those things, but actually then taking that to ourselves, and just it's about compassion and actually having self-compassion on ourselves. So when we feel frightened about something, and I talk a lot about what we traditionally call negative emotions, because those are the things that we quite often get upset about ourselves, like when we're angry, or when we're stressed, or when we're overwhelmed, or when we're jealous. And we traditionally feel like those are bad emotions and we shouldn't feel those things, and we shouldn't get angry and we shouldn't get stressed. But actually, if we can bring in this peace that we're offering our children, this compassion, if we can bring in self-compassion and be inquisitive, so coming back to this being curious, be curious about why am I feeling angry, instead of just saying, oh, I shouldn't be angry and I'm an awful person and I'm really stressed and I shouldn't be stressed and it's all bad. Actually bringing in this compassion for ourselves, bringing curiosity, and asking ourselves, why am I angry? Why am I stressed? And from there, you can really begin then to bring in those same tools you bring in for your children and say, actually, what do I need? What am I telling myself I need? Or what am I missing? Am I angry because I'm hungry? That's a thing. Or I'm really tired, or what is it that's making me stressed? Is there something that this is regularly happening? Is there a pattern to this? I remember one job that I was in, it was the only time in my teaching career I went and saw the GP, and I didn't realise I was stressed, but I was really unwell. And I went and saw the GP, and they said, you're stressed. Tell me about your lifestyle. And it turned out that really it was work. And I came home, and my husband said, how did it go? What did they say? So I said, they said I'm stressed, and they've said it's work. We'd had a chat about it, and I concur, it's definitely work. That's really, really not good, which my husband knew as well, because it had been ongoing. And this hadn't occurred to me. And my husband just looked at me and he said, why don't you just get a new job? I was like, oh, yes, I could do that, couldn't I? I hadn't thought about it. So it's just kind of bringing in that element of being curious and asking what's actually going on, but not missing the self-compassion, not beating ourselves up because we got cross about something, but actually looking at the bigger picture and figuring out why. So self-compassion, curiosity, and asking those big questions about why those things are happening.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, Heidi, whether do you think that if you were in that kind of situation now, whether you would be quicker to notice what was going on for you?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things about unschooling ourselves. Like when you start out, I think there's a very rapid, a very intense period of time where a lot of things change, particularly if you start unschooling, like I said, because you've got this dual element of your children coming alongside you and really challenging a lot of the assumptions and things that you thought were true. So it happens very quickly, and then you kind of come to a point where it's a little bit more stable and you're living a beautiful joyful and peaceful and this kind of abundant lifestyle. Not that it's without its meltdowns and its challenges, but I think what happens is those things arise less often, and when they do come up, it's a familiar pattern. Like, oh yeah, I recognize this feeling. Okay. And you have a lot more tools at hand because you're well practiced at navigating it. And I think a lot of the tools are that self-compassion. Oh yeah, I know this is happening again. Okay. And so you can kind of ride it easier because you don't get so flustered about it and kind of like an intense, oh no, I've got to, this is, I don't know what to do with this and I don't know where to go and I don't know who to talk to. Now, because it does still happen now, all these years later, I'm in community, I recognise the process, I can sit with those feelings and those thoughts a lot longer, I can take my time over them and be happy to take my time over them. My children are older, so I can say to them, because they are now of an age where they can be rational and understand things like that, I can say to them, actually, I'm finding this a bit tricky. I would like to take a moment or some time to have a think about how I feel about this, and they can be okay with that. Whereas when they're 4 and 5, or maybe even 10 and 11, if you've got neurodivergent children, they want you to get with the program right now. They want you on it. There's not really a room in the same way for you to have that discussion that says, I need to go and think about this for a minute. So it still happens, but it's a very different experience further down the line.
So if people are in this process of kind of unschooling themselves, it strikes me that different areas of our lives, sort of some things shift really quickly and other things take quite a lot longer.
Yeah, I think so. And then some things people find really easy to let go of, and that will be different for everybody. So my history with religious institutions and church is very long, complicated and complex and deep. And other people, they might be like listening to this and going, well, that I don't care about that. That's not a thing. But other people might have a more complex relationship with health and diet and food. And that's going to take them longer to work through those things. Unschooling is very much about finding peace and doing things that your children find peaceful and doing things that your children find joyful. So co-sleeping, a lot of unschooling families co-sleep for many, many more years than other families do, because it's a peaceful way for our children to fall asleep. And so we just keep doing it until one day our children go, yeah, all right, I'm going to go sleep in my own bed now. And they toddle off, or maybe not toddle if they're not toddlers, but, they at some point go and do that. So it's different for everybody. And it's about this being peaceful and joyful. And then if we can follow that in our own lives and go, actually, do you know what? I'm doing this thing that actually I find intensely difficult. And I don't mean like challenging in a really, amazing way. Like, why am I doing this? I've known some unschooling parents to completely change their careers because they've come to the realization that they're doing a job they absolutely hate. It was just a path that they followed, in an extension of their education, and this is where they ended up. And now their children are spending their days and their lives doing things that are meaningful to them and joyful and interesting. And as parents, they've reflected and gone, oh, hang on a minute, I want that. I want to do something that's meaningful and joyful. And so they've completely changed their careers. It doesn't have to be that drastic. You might just take up a new hobby. You might just go, do you know what? I've always fancied, I don't know, butterflies. I'm going to go out and I'm going to learn about butterflies, and I'm going to go and find out where I can see them. Or you try things alongside your children. Like paddleboarding is something quite recent for us that we have taken up because our children were interested in it. And so that's something we did alongside our children. And that's not something I would have chosen to do as my own interest, but I do it alongside my children, and it's really fun. And we enjoy it all together. So it doesn't have to be a huge life change. You can try small things, like what would happen if I didn't eat, I say, broccoli, because everyone says broccoli is good for you. And what happens if I don't want to eat broccoli? What if I want to try something else instead? It can be a simple thing.
Or olives. There are some people who really like olives, and there are some people who really don't, and there are some people who are kind of ambivalent about them, but eat them because that's what you do.
Yeah. Oh, and being able to say no. Do you know? I don't have to politely eat that olive because everyone else is. I can say no, thank you. I don't want that olive.
I don't need to go to that thing, or I don't need to have my drive repaved because everybody else in the street has.
Yes. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. Like, do you really want to do that? Why am I going to that? What am I doing? Do I really want to spend my evening with those people and or go to that event and spend my money on that thing? Actually, no. I want to be at home in pajamas. Thank you very much. Or the other way round. Or the other way round. Equally the other way round.
Yes.
Like, actually, would I rather go out this evening and go and see what's on locally and go and join the local pub quiz? Or, we're right near the South Downs. We can go on the top of the South Downs and look at the stars and, go do something joyful.
So something about just noticing what's going on within. Are you finding that joy and peace, or is there something kind of rumbling underneath, which if you listen to it would tell you, actually, this isn't comfortable. I don't fit here.
And quite often, particularly adults, we get swept into like a routine or a habit of what we're doing. And it might be that it suited us in the first place when we started doing it. And actually, if we take the time to kind of reflect, we can go, oh, that's not serving me anymore. That isn't something I find joyful anymore. This is part of unschooling ourselves as well. Our children do this very easily. They get up and they walk out. They do it unapologetically. As adults, we might do it a little bit more sensitively, but actually being able to say, this doesn't serve me anymore, or this isn't somewhere that I can serve anymore, or this isn't something that I'm enjoying anymore, and be able to put that down and walk away and not get stuck in those ruts. So a little bit like we were saying in the beginning, like we do things without thinking about it. It might just be habit now and we're not thinking about it. But actually to have a little reflection and then make a conscious and intentional choice about it. Yes, I do want to invest in this and I do want to do this, or actually no, I think I want to explore something else. Even if you don't know what that is right now, that's always the scarier bit when we're unschooling ourselves. The bit where we know what we're doing doesn't suit, but we're not quite sure what it looks like next. So there's kind of that unlearning, like we've kind of unlearned, oh, hang on, my child doesn't need to do curriculum. And then there's this bit where we go, but what are we doing instead? It's like, what does that look like instead? There's that relearning, and there can be this bit in between where it feels very uncertain. That's the bit you get practiced at when you've done it a while.
Yes, but actually that bit in between is really, really important because you sort of need the space to simmer down from one thing before you can move to the next. I don't know if you've come across the concept of liminal space, which is giving a name really to that kind of in-betweenness. But the idea that if you're letting go of one thing, you actually need some dead space, as it were. So we're not sure what's happening next and we're not going to force the next thing in order to be ready for the thing after. And if you try and leap that gap, then quite often you end up leaping into something which doesn't fit either because you were just sort of panicked into it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that moment of pausing and being comfortable in that pause, because again, something that we've learned, again, probably subconsciously, is that it's really important to be doing things. We've got to be doing something, but actually to be able to sit comfortably in that space is an art form in itself. And it's completely okay. In fact, like you said, it's necessary. It can be a healing space as well to work through some of the feelings you have, maybe the disappointment or that anger or the frustration, the realization that the thing you've let go of has been the thing you've been holding on to for years. There's a lot in that space to be mulling over. And it's really important to do so. It's a healing process to be able to do that.
And particularly if it's been something that has been long-standing and really deep, because otherwise, if you then leapt into something else without allowing that time, then there's two things, isn't there? You can end up unconsciously bringing stuff with you, but you can also end up unconsciously bringing with you your fight against the last thing. because it was so destructive. So yes, so I think for anybody who's making a move which is from something which has been really ingrained and really influential on kind of who you are and how you interact with the world and what your deepest beliefs and values are, when that's the kind of thing which you're sort of suddenly questioning, of course that's going to take time.
And whatever it is as well, there's always going to be like another layer, another question. And when we're talking about things like spirituality or even how we parent, there's lots of questions around what is it that I think and believe and hold true, and what is it that someone else has told me to think and believe and hold true. And it can get really complex, and those things take time, and one may even wonder whether there is an end point, and whether we're just continually assessing and evaluating those things. So which again is why you have to bring in this kind of self-compassion element. So there's a lovely quote by Maya Angelou about forgiving ourselves for not knowing what we didn't know before, something like that. We might have to go and double check that. And it's beautiful because we can't know everything. And we are always learning, which again is an unschooling thing. Like, we're always learning. Children are always learning, and adults are always learning. There isn't like an end point. We don't get to the age of 18 and then go, oh, we're finished now. we're done. We've got all the end of university. Tick. Got my degree. Done learning. As humans, we're always learning, and we're always learning new things and learning new things about ourselves. So bringing in that self-compassion is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think working on the basis that some of what we think now, we won't think in the future. I remember hearing somebody say, I know that some of the things I think now are wrong. And I know this because some of the things that I was convinced of 5 years ago, I now know were wrong. So inevitably, there will be some things that I think now which in 10 years' time I will entirely disagree with.
Yeah. And actually that's part of the process. And it should be. We shouldn't be stuck in this is who I am and this is who I will always be, particularly in terms of our ideas and understanding about the world and how we should be and how we interact, and all those things just change constantly. I'm always being challenged by new perspective and new ideas. I've just finished writing a book which is going to be published in February. And that is one of the hardest things about writing a book, understanding yourself as an author and saying, I'm going to write this book, but actually quite likely because it takes a really long time to write and publish a book, but quite rightly, by the time I publish this book, I might disagree with some of the things I've written in it. But being able to understand that about other people as well, like being able to hold that true for yourself and for other people, like that person that I married 20 years ago now has different ideas and thoughts and beliefs than they did then. Just anyone. It's, people change.
So this whole idea of unschooling is potentially all pervasive, isn't it? It can encompass how we view our own feelings, how we interact with the things that we were told, our own ability to change as we mature. It's very different being a 54-year-old woman to what it is being a 25-year-old woman for all sorts of reasons. Some of them are hormonal, some of them...
I'm pulling faces. I'm agreeing wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So you kind of walk through the world differently. Simple things like when your knees creak a bit more, the things that you used to be able to do easily before, you can't do in the same way. And one of the things that you learn as a parent is that children change and grow, and part of unschooling is inevitably about creating space for people to change and grow and develop. And so if we can do that for ourselves and the other people in our lives, I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. And to also bring in that unschooling ourselves element, when we're unschooling our children, to allow them to change and grow in the ways that they are drawn to, and in the time scale that they're changing and growing, the beautiful different directions that different children go in, and the way that they navigate the world, and they do that. Actually, for us to be able to do that for ourselves as well, to kind of be able to expand in my head, I've got a picture of a cocoon, but it's not like a cocoon. It's more like a structure that's holding us in, that says this is the type of job you should have, or this is the car you should drive, and this is what you should do in your spare time, and this is what you should spend your money on. Kind of constraints put on us by other people or expectations or society, and for us to actually be able to lean into, where do I want to explore? What do I want to expand into? What do I want to spend my money on? What do I want to spend my time doing? And leaning in more to, what do I find fulfilling? So this is why I call it unschooling ourselves, because those are the things that we are affording our children, and then to kind of turn it around and afford those things to ourselves as well. And it has this beautiful benefit of us living in alignment with our children. Like they see when we're not doing those things, and that becomes like a source of tension, because they do grow into an understanding of, well, hang on, I'm doing all this, but that's not what adulthood looks like. That's not what my parents look like. So if we can unschool ourselves, our children can have a reassurance that what they're experiencing and doing leads into something beautiful and wonderful. And that adulthood is also, I know it comes with its challenges, but there is joy and peace and all those things to be found and had and lived.
Yes. Yeah, so modelling what it is to listen to ourselves. And it occurs to me that for many people listening to this, they will have children who are still in the education system and who are not on an unschooling journey. But I still think that there are elements of this listening to ourselves and kind of having this sense of inner alignment for ourselves and having that for our children. Even if all it does in terms of education is give permission for conversations that say, yeah, I'm not surprised you found that really difficult today at school. There are elements of this that work for everybody.
Yeah. And I really encourage people to consider carefully what's the messages that schooling is giving them, that they can take the pressure off at home with. But to be on your child's side, to be able to listen to your child when they're finding things difficult or joyful, whatever, but when they're finding things difficult, to be on your child's side. And messages about school being the be all and end all, and passing exams being the be all and end all, and getting an A grade being the be all and end all. It's actually the love of learning that actually is really important, and being interested in things. School has a habit of focusing on things your children are finding tricky. Unschooling has a habit of focusing on things your child loves and is really good at. And the other things will come in time through a meaningful interaction with whatever it is they're doing. And if they're not academics and it's not school, if it's Lego or climbing trees, I know I keep talking about climbing trees a lot because my boys did that a lot. Climbing trees, ice skating, I don't know, paddling in water at the beach. Find something that your child's interested in, even if it's not academics.
Yeah. And often there are opportunities in those things that you wouldn't expect. So we live next to a canal, and my husband and I were canoeing along the canal and came past some neighbours. And this guy had moved in recently to a house near the canal, and he'd got this sort of big rope swing off of a tree. His job involves climbing up buildings and trees for various things. He's self-employed and does all sorts of random stuff, which involves climbing. There are opportunities in all sorts, which is fascinating.
And I think so school has a habit of really narrowing our view on what's possible. So if you can do that, if you can go out and step out into the world and go, look, this person's got a career in going up trees with ropes. You don't have to sit at a desk for 5 hours a day. And at some point, either A, you'll learn how to do your accountancy and financing as someone who's self-employed, or B, you'll outsource it to somebody who knows how to do it. So either way, it's going to be fine. There are a million jobs out there. People have said, children who do horse riding. Well, they're not going to do that as a career, are they? Well, somebody's teaching these children to ride horses. Who do you think they are? Somebody's spending time with these children in dance classes. Somebody's doing swimming. There's people doing all sorts of things out there in the world, and not only that, but there's all sorts of jobs available in the world that don't even exist yet, that your children will be doing in 5, 10, 15 years time. There's a whole array of things out there and lots of possibilities. So unschooling ourselves, opening up our minds to what is actually out there, instead of being funneled into this way of thinking that this is the only thing there is, this is the only way you're going to succeed. It really isn't. And more importantly, if your children have got supportive parents and, like I said, people who are on their side and good relationships, then those things are the things that are going to carry them through.
Yeah. Fantastic. It's been a really, really good conversation, Heidi. Do you want to let people know how they can find you if they would like to find out more about what you get up to?
So I have lots of information on my website, liveplaylearn.org. You can go there. There's things that you can read. You can sign up for specific information about unschooling, and you can also access my unschooling community, which is called the Unschooling Village Hub, where we get together every week for those who can join online, and then there's lots of pre-recorded stuff and an online community chat group as well for those who aren't able to do that. So that would be one way, and then the other way is Facebook and Instagram. There'll be links on the website, and so I post regularly there about what we're up to and what unschooling looks like, and sharing ideas and things if you want a little bit more of an insight into what life can be like without school.
And you do a podcast, I understand.
Oh, yes, I do, don't I? That's a good job you remembered. I've only been doing it for 4 years. So that's called Unschooling Conversations. And so on Unschooling Conversations, I invite guests on, a little bit like yourself. They share their unschooling journey. Some of them are families that I have worked with and feel able to come and share their stories and the difference that unschooling has made to them and what that has looked like for them. So a little bit explaining what their unschooling, their self-process has been like, and lots of people who are interested in different ways of educating their children and have been doing it a long time. Veterans in the unschooling world who have time to come and share their wealth of experience and knowledge. And I have topics. I have ones on self-compassion. That comes up a lot. Neurodivergence comes up a lot, and community. So we're on season 3 of the podcast at the moment, and those definitely the 3 topics that have come up most frequently. So you can go and find that. That's on Spotify and YouTube.
Yeah, and that's Unschooling Conversations, if people want that.
Yes.
Excellent. And what's your book called that's coming out in February?
My book is called School Isn't for Everyone and What You Can Do Instead. And apparently that fits on the cover of the book. I was a bit worried it was a bit long. So yeah, School Isn't for Everyone and What You Can Do Instead. So I interviewed 10 families who came and shared their stories and their experiences of unschooling and what it looks like for them and the reasons why they do it, and lots of information covering that very intense period at the beginning of your unschooling journey where lots of things change very, very rapidly, and so how you move from school through to the ease of unschooling. It's a really practical book as well. It's got little reflections and exercises in, and it's got some beautiful illustrations by a friend of mine. So yes, I'm really looking forward to that being published in February.
Brilliant. Well, people should look out for that. Thank you so much for your time, Heidi. This has been really, really good.
Thank you so much for having me back and letting me chat lots.
No, it's been brilliant. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Loved Called Gifted podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email lovedcalledgifted@gmail.com. You can find a transcript of this podcast at lovedcalledgifted.com, and that's also the place to go if you're interested in the Loved Called Gifted course, or if you'd like to find out about spiritual direction or coaching. Thank you for listening.